Dubai. So for those who are watching on YouTube, WWF is the world's leading conservation organization. We work in more than 100 countries. We have on-the-ground conservation work, and we also work in places like the COP, where we're trying to influence governments. We're trying to work with businesses, because these are the guys that can make a big difference. We're trying to address the drivers of climate change. So without further ado, I'll start with the panel. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. Okay, so Manuel, I'm going to start with you, and sort of talking around the global stock take and phase out fossil fuels. So for you, what do you think success at COP28 looks like? So as I say, we've got the global stock take, this check-in from the Paris Agreement, and we've got phase out of fossil fuels. What are the sorts of things that we need to see?
Thank you, Steve. Can you hear me well? Yes. Thank you. So let me start by welcoming you all for being here in the Panda Hub. You know that when we decided, I think it was in COP23, to organize the first Panda Hub, we immediately thought in the concept of home, be at home. And that is the idea. This is the home not only for pandas, but for everybody. The idea, this is a home in which you will listen how much we are developing ideas, what are our expectations, what do we think it must be the outcome of the COP. So it is a place to share, it is a place to discuss, it is a place to collaborate and to cooperate. That is the idea of this Panda Hub. And that is why our motto, everything, everywhere, all at once. The idea it is to have you all helping us, but more than helping us, helping the world to achieve with their objective, to fulfill with all what we have decided it must be fulfilled. That's the idea of the Panda Hub. So again, let me welcome you all. So success. When we think about success, it is important to recognize where we are, no? Because we do need to know how much, how fast, how soon we have to play our role, to execute our actions, to achieve what we had already defined it must be achieved. And we know that we are not on track. We know that we are far away on what it must be, our level of development by now. We know that we are in this decisive decade, and we just have 4 remains years to finish the decade, to end in the decade, and we haven't developed yet all those actions that we have to develop, to fulfill with that decisive decade. And we know that if we are not able to do that, we will have an overshoot, probably by the end of the current decade. And we know what does it mean, because with 1.18 degrees of temperature that it has been already raised by now, we can see what are the extreme climate events that mostly the most vulnerable people is suffering. So we know that if we don't correct the course, we will have even more of those extreme climate events. So the idea it is to correct the course. The idea it is to recover credibility. The idea it is to have by the end of this COP some strong outcome that includes a strong political statement that can realign the process, that can make us able to recover the credibility in the process. So if I were to summarize in one word what or how to measure that success, it is by saying we do need to progress. Progress in this gradual process, it is a key element. And how to progress? And you, Steve, made me a couple of questions. One related to the global stock take, and the second related to the phasing out of fossil fuels. So let me answer the first one. We know that in the Paris Agreement, we decided to adopt what it is called the ratchet mechanism. That means that we have cycles, the cycle for the NDCs and also the cycle for the long-term strategies. So the importance of connecting the 5-year cycle of the NDCs with a clear vision by 2050, the long-term strategy for every country. And we know that the current NDCs are not enough. We know that even if each one of the countries that have put on the table their own NDC fulfill with their own actions, even with that, that is not enough. So we know that the next cycle of the NDCs must be a renewed one, a one that it must be more mandatory, a one that it should mobilize country to raise ambition, to enhance action, to define more clear targets. And what is the only way to do that? By the global stocktake. Because many people is thinking that the global stocktake, it is just a balance. And do we need a balance? Probably yes, but actually no, because we know where we are. We know that we are not on track. We know how much or how far away we are on this time in comparison with what we had expected it would be. So the balance is good, sure, but to confirm what we knew for a long time ago. So more important than just the balance, it is how strong the outcome would be. Because if the outcome is weak, the next cycle of the NDC will be exactly the same. And we will lose 5 years. So we will end the decade without any clarity on how to correct the course and how to realign the process and how to recover that credibility. So that is a key element. So that is why in the global stocktake, we must demand a clear outcome. And in the first day of the COP, what is our starting point for the negotiations in the coming 2 weeks? We don't know yet. Because if we think in the 2 documents that have been produced for the global stocktake, the synthesis report for the technical dialogue, and the second document that it is called something like views on element for the global stocktake process, I don't remember the title, it is clear that there are many elements there that should move negotiators toward a strong outcome. But we know that negotiators won't consider that as a draft zero. So we are still expecting that by the half of this COP, we could have a draft zero to discuss what it should be the outcome of the global stocktake. So my recommendation also as a way to measure success, it is to be very proactive, to put in hands of negotiators things that could be added to the text. If you were in a situation in which you have to decide what for me it is the most important piece that it must be well reflected in the global stocktake, think on that and put in hands of negotiators those kind of paragraphs, those kind of clauses, because it is the only way in which we can secure to have a good outcome of the global stocktake. If not, the risk it is to have a very vague text that it is not saying anything new, and that shouldn't be the way to proceed. So, to answer your first question, to measure success of this COP in relation to global stocktake, it must be by having a clear outcome with clear recommendation that can strengthen NDCs in its new cycle, and that it can be more mandatory to parties or to countries for their next cycle. Because also we do need to have some outcome that can connect us with our domestic responsibility. If we get in this COP a good outcome, we can immediately move to our own government to demand them to prepare a better NDC and to fulfill with their own action. Because by now, probably we are not doing that. We are not pushing our government to say, what is happening with this action that you brought in the current NDC? We do need to have more activism to mobilize our government to fulfill with their own pledges, because if not, we will be exactly in the same. So that in relation to the global stocktake. But also let me say something. I have been thinking on the net zero concept for the public side, government, and for the private side. So let's just discuss the public side. if you try to identify what are the instruments, how to verify, how to verify, how to push countries to fulfill with their own actions, and all what you think it must be part of a system, immediately you will see that it is an incomplete system. We just have the NDCs, the synthesis report that the Secretariat it is used to preparing every time. It is not a report of aggregate effects. It is not pointing any country to say you are not fulfilling with your target. So it is a very weak system. It is not a system that it is pushing the world by pushing every country to fulfill with their own. So we have to complete that system. If we believe that it is key to recover credibility, we do need to complete the system. That is, for me, the key element of the global stocktake. So let's put a lot of effort in the global stocktake. Also, in this document called Views on Element, the co-chairs are suggesting that by the end of this process, we should have a negotiated text under the CMA 5, so under the Paris Agreement body, a political declaration, and a technical annex. So, if negotiators are not willing to have a political declaration, let's move to ask to the presidency a political cover decision. That is something that we have to do, because we have to send a clear mandate to the next COP or to the coming COPs to continue fulfilling with our own obligation. In relation, do you prefer to stop and to answer after that the fossil fuels?
No, please carry on the fossil fuels, and then I'll bring Marina in.
Okay, so let's move into the fossil fuel thing. So we clearly know that the main topic in the climate agenda, it is the energy transition. We are from a nature organization, and for sure we will continue pushing to bring nature into the climate debate. But on the other hand, it is true, and we know that by doing that, it won't be enough if it is not well complemented with a clear energy transition, that is a key element, and with a phasing out of fossil fuels. So let's continue pushing for the nature side of the agenda, but never forget that the energy transition, it is the key element. And when we think about the energy transition, there are three main topics. The phasing out of fossil fuels, that is the first one. The second one, it is the renewable energies, how to increase renewable energies, and then to strengthen our actions towards energy efficiency. Those are the three main pieces of the energy transition side. But it is the phasing out of fossil fuels that it is the most urgent topic. We know that that would measure success of this COP. So a weak statement related to phasing out of fossil fuels will bring as a conclusion that we are failing in this COP. And a strong statement, it would be exactly the opposite. Where this statement, it should be included. It could be in the global stocktake, again, in the political declaration, or in a cover decision by the presidency. So we are demanding, and we hope that the presidency can have the courage to put in front of negotiators and parties a strong cover decision with a clear political statement to phasing out fossil fuel. Because a COP depends a lot on the management of the presidency. It depends on his willingness and his ability to build consensus to bring this kind of a statement into the cover decision. We saw that in Glasgow. You remember that last-minute discussion when Alok Sharma put on the table a cover decision with a clear statement for phasing out fossil fuels. Unfortunately, that was diminished because of the India participation that switched the term phasing out by phasing down. But everybody knows that Alok tried, that he really tried to push. So we are expecting the same. We are expecting to have this clear statement. And why? Because this is something that it is not going to come because of negotiators. That is clear. It is not that negotiators will discuss and negotiate terms or conditions for phasing out fossil fuels. So it must come because of the political willingness of the presidency, and that is a key element. And why it is so urgent? First, because it is the only way to fulfill with our objective by the end of this decade and by 2050. But second, it is that because of that political statement, we can move all the other pieces. We can create this virtuous cycle or circle in which then we can move into finance to avoid to have multilateral development banks or some other actors still putting money for oil exploration or some other fossil fuel activities. But we do need to have the political willingness, a clear political willingness that can make us more able to continue pushing all the other pieces as a way to achieve our objective. But again, it is the combination of the three pieces, the renewable, the energy efficiency, and the phasing out of fossil fuel. So those two are clearly ways to measure success of the current COP. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Manuel. There's 4 seats down the front, and I think the panel doesn't bite. So if you're standing at the back, please. Sure of that? Well, I've only just met you, so yeah. You have seats. So please do come and sit down the front. And while you're coming, so Manuel talked about nature as well as the energy transition, Marina. And so, in your view, what can we expect on nature as an outcome from this COP?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me now? I swapped microphones because the other one was not working. Now? Yes. Okay. I was trying to be cheeky. I was trying to take the wisdom from Manuel coming this way. So interesting question. Of course, echoing Manuel's point that, a nature win will definitely be a strong outcome on the energy transition away from fossil fuels. That is obviously a key priority. But in addition to that, I think for this COP, we need to see a reaffirmation on the importance of nature when it comes to climate change mitigation and adaptation. And I say reaffirmation because obviously the previous COPs have already started that synergy. COP26 in Glasgow initiated or started the first, reference of the synergies of climate and nature. COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh built on that decision and recognized nature-based solutions as an important climate change mitigation and adaptation strategy and advised parties to implement nature-based solutions. Since then, we also have the Global Biodiversity Framework back in Montreal, coming Montreal decision. So the question is how this COP will react and respond to those previous decisions. And again, potentially at the cover text to have those linkages very, very strongly referenced. But I think it has to be beyond the reaffirmation. It has to be actionable. We're talking about action today. So actionable recommendations across, I would say, on the decisions on the major topics. So global stocktake is one. We want to see recommendations for countries to integrate nature into their NDCs, right? So how do we reflect, again, the GBF targets into those recommendations across all biomes, right? So deforestation, land, oceans, fresh water need to be kind of very much prioritized as part of the national determined contributions. But also guidance. I think that is also missing for the countries on how to integrate nature and climate into the operationalization of those decisions. And it's not only GSD, I think I would say is going beyond that. So we're talking about mitigation work program, adaptation work program, the finance target. So again, we cannot tackle climate change without nature. So there have to be, strong targets and clear targets as part of those decision outcomes as well. So, and I'm reading this, Manuel. So I would actually borrow that statement for nature action as well. So everything, everywhere, all at once. So all decisions of this COP need to reflect strong outcome for nature. And then just to kind of close that, to say that, of course, on the non-negotiated outcomes, there's a lot of initiatives that come from the presidency, from non-state actors, from governments. I believe the Nature Day is on the 9th of December. The question is how those sort of initiatives, if you like, are reflected on the actual negotiations text and the decisions, right? And we want to look at progress. How do we track all these initiatives that essentially help us to meet that goal of 1.5 and the Global Biodiversity Framework? So I'll stop here and we can discuss that a bit more.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, you talked about what happens in the negotiations and then also what happens outside the negotiations. So, for example, this event in the Panda Hub, and what has happened in COPs historically is you have people talking about oceans and you have people talking about food outside the negotiations themselves, so in the side events and the NGOs and country pavilions. And then, over time, these sort of things get taken up and, the noise gets louder and they get taken up in the negotiations. So I think you're right that the idea of reaffirmation is good, but we need to move a step on. So you talked about the global biodiversity framework under the Convention on Biodiversity, the CBD, and so maybe this is for both you and Manuel. Like how do you see the agendas of climate change and the agenda of nature? And you're right that you can't solve one without the other. How do you see those coming together or converging?
As well as we are in the decisive decade in case of climate, also we know that we have committed to fulfill with the 30 for 30. And look, 30 for 30 sounds like a number, but the first 30 is a year, and we are in 2023, so 6 years ahead of the end. And the second 30 means coverage. So the average of coverage, conservation coverage, it is like 20. No, so we have to extend that coverage in 10 points. How much it's possible to do that? No, it is very difficult. It is very challenging. And we don't want to fail again. We did it with the Aichi target. We can't fail again. So the only way to do it is by connecting our climate objective with our nature objective. Also to make it easier to countries, mostly in the global south, because you can be more effective by connecting NDCs with MBSAPs, the climate plans with the biodiversity plans. No? By connecting climate action that also it could be considered as conservation areas. The point is that we have to start to connecting. We have nature-based solutions as the low-hanging fruit. No? That could be a very useful tool to do those kind of things. But probably it is not the only one. We have to continue exploring on how can we bring nature into climate and climate into nature, because it is in both sides. It is not only by one side. But also we do need to have science supporting those kind of action, because we remember when IPBES told us that one of the key drivers of nature loss, it is climate change. And also we know what does it mean for climate change to lose nature. So we do need to continue having science supporting this kind of converging actions as a way to continue connecting both kind of things. But also we do need to give more content to the concept of nature positive. No, we are still working with the net zero, that is for climate, mostly related to mitigation. We have resilience, Adil, probably you will refer to the resilience objective, in which also we have to progress. But now we have a third concept, that it is nature positive. What does nature positive means exactly? No, what is that content? What are those sectors that we have to focus to achieve a nature positive objective? Because in climate we know it is the energy, it is the industry, it is the infrastructure and cities, and it is the land, agriculture, forest, among some others. But what are those sectors in nature that could make us more effective to achieve the 30 for 30 and all the targets of the global biodiversity framework? So there are many pending tasks, and the idea is to work on that, to work with WWF, to work with IUCN, to work with the people of Nature Positive, as a way to define more concrete ways and avenues to promote that convergence. Nature-based solutions is good, but not enough. No, we do need to continue exploring those kinds of converging elements that can make us more able to achieve with both, with the Paris Agreement and with the Global Biodiversity Framework.
Okay, thanks. Would you like to add to that?
How can I follow this statement? But I think just to mention a piece of work that we've been working together with a climate and energy practice led by Fernanda, our global policy lead. So essentially, we're trying to look at that guidance, right? We spoke about guidance in terms of integrating NDCs to NBSAPs, integrating CBD targets to the UNFCCC, right? And inspired by a joint work group that we've seen as part of the food discussion, so the Coronivia Sharm el Sheikh joint working group. Essentially, what we're trying to explore is that a possible pathway for countries to explore collaboratively? And then the idea is for this COP to ask for this type of joint work to commence in the next COP, COP29, with a series of dialogues and conversations to see how do we operationalize this integration, essentially, from a party's perspective, and come to some concrete conclusions in the next COPs, COP30, COP31. So this is a proposal that we have developed with Fernanda actually leading that, and it's circulated across friendly country parties, and we want to see how folks are responding to that.
Okay, thanks. All right, Adil, I'd like to bring you in now. So first of all, I'd like you to explain to people who don't know what loss and damage is, what it's about, and then why the fund that was set up in Egypt last year, was agreed in Egypt last year, was so important, and what needs to happen.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone. Is this good? Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for this important conversation on an important day. I'll answer your question. In some ways, when we think about what is our expectation can mean one of two things. I'm a professor by trade, so as a professor, it can be the analytical thing. What do we expect will happen? Not much. Or it can mean, what do we want to happen? Right? And that, I think, is what Manuel was laying out, because our expectation has to be more than our practical analysis of the least that can happen. And that push has to always happen. We are here because we are friends of the COP. I'm a friend of the COP. I've been at them nearly from the beginning. But we are not just cheerleaders. We are keepers of the ambition. The cheerleading has to happen by the negotiators themselves, but it essentially will come from the actions that will come from it. So I wanted to make that distinction of sort of, at least what I see my role as, which is to encourage, which is to help, which is to assist, which is to analyze, which is to visualize, which is to make visions, but forever to keep that ambition that was in the UNFCCC. And the ambition in the UNFCCC, I'm going back to the beginning of my career at Rio, which is where I started, was that there will not be a change in global temperature. We believed at that time we could do that. We were naive. Maybe we were stupid. I want to remain stupid. Right? I do not want to live in a world where we keep slipping, and that comes to your question of what is loss and damage. I'll tell you what loss and damage is. This is very personal to me in the sense that because this is one of the biggest goals of WWF in terms of this, as Manuel pointed out, it is personal. It is personal because that is one of the things I work on in my own academic intellectual career, adaptation and now loss and damage, and also because I come from Pakistan. Loss and damage is that you are a farmer who is barely making a living, and for no fault of yours, your house is blown away in a flood. Loss and damage is you are a child and you die because of excessive heat in the streets of Karachi for emissions that you had nothing to do with. Right? That is what loss and damage is. Now we can create we do create, and we need to create all sorts of fancy concepts. That's what academics like me do, to help us get there. But unless we have that image, that there is a loss to humans, there is a damage, that is loss and damage. I don't know where that picture is. It could very well be from Kurangi in Karachi. It is a picture of mangroves. I know it's a picture of mangroves. Right? You damage those mangroves. You cause someone's life and livelihood to be lost. Right? That is loss and damage. In many ways, loss and damage, as Steve, you and I have talked about, is something that I wish were not talking about. Right? Again, going back to when Manuel and myself and some others in this room started off, I think we had not imagined that we would ever want to talk about loss and damage. I would wish we were not talking about adaptation. I would wish we lived in a world where mitigation actually was enough so that you didn't need to adapt. Right? So adaptation in that sense is the opposite, is the failure of mitigation. Because we fail in doing enough mitigation in enough time, we have to adapt. It is not the opposite of mitigation. That doesn't mean because we have to adapt, we don't mitigate. In fact, we mitigate even more. The more we mitigate, the less we adapt. But if you think about it in this way to your questions, if you fail in mitigation, you have to adapt. And adaptation has a cost. And if you fail to adapt, you have loss and damage. Right? So loss and damage is something to be avoided. I do not want, the goal of the fund ought not to be to figure out how much you are going to pay me when I lose my child. That's not the conversation I want to have. I want to have the conversation, what are you and me and we going to do so that I do not lose my child? Right? That is why I think loss and damage is one of the defining things that's happening in that room. Right? I've spent some time in that room in my life, and if you're in that room, these are very hardworking people. They're some of the most committed people. But the room has a dynamic. Right? Every negotiation room has a dynamic, one of which is that it doesn't have windows. Because rooms that large can never have windows. I wish they did, so that you could see. But one of those dynamics is that you very quickly can get into this problem of thinking that your job is the little paper on which you are putting brackets and moving around words. Right? And real change happens when you actually try to look outside a window and say, okay, what I'm really about is impacting that mangrove with the words I'm doing. Why is loss and damage important? Every COP, I think, the planners, the leaders, the presidents, and Manuel has been one, want their COP to be remembered well. And every COP, if you look back, is remembered for something. If I say Paris, right, you smile. I say Copenhagen, you didn't smile. Right? All I have to say is those words. The question is, when I say Dubai, right, I'm looking at you. What will we remember? Right? I do think that because of all those things, because of its salience, we will remember Dubai one way or the other, good or bad, and I hope it's good, partly by loss and damage. The mistake to make would be we will remember it because loss and damage was agreed upon. No. If we remember Dubai as the place where there was another placebo fund created, it will forever be without the smile. If we remember Dubai as a place where a real, meaningful, operationalized fund with real money as opposed to $0, a real infrastructure of loss and damage action was created, then it will be remembered in a very different way. So my expectation on the first end is I think something will be agreed on. I think one of the big surprises, we all know one of the big surprises of the last COP was that the idea of a loss and damage fund was agreed upon. That doesn't mean the idea was bought by everyone. The challenge before Dubai is to either demonstrate that those who didn't really like the idea were able to turn it into a placebo, or those of us who thought the idea was good worked hard enough to put actual meaning in it. Meaning is even more important than dollars. Meaning is partly structure. For example, if you have a loss and damage fund and it's not called loss and damage, it's not a loss and damage fund. If you have a loss and damage fund and doesn't have dollars that are committed, it's not a fund. Right? You can call it whatever you want. Marrakesh had 3 funds. Does anyone remember where they are? The COP of placebo funds. Right? It had many other good things too. So I think that is the challenge before us. Can we put real meaning into this term? And that will require all sides, those who did not fully like the idea and those who were very enthusiastic about it, but not fully thought through, to come together and say, what does this mean in that pantheon of actions that we are taking? I've taken too much time, and I apologize for that, but allow me to say just one other thing.
Just before, when you said you expect, were you using expect as in terms of what you want or what you think will happen?
Make a guess. I put pandas on my shirt and shout when I talk. I only talk about what I want, what I wish. I am too old, I am too fat to die without seeing real action on climate. Right? No, I really mean that. I really mean that. I think that's the passion we need to bring to this. Allow me to say this. I think where we are, as I said, I go back to Rio, and that's when I started on climate and all. This is 28. 28 is a very disturbing number. That is 28 years of me not succeeding. I really think that when we started, we thought there will be, we were talking about this last night, 6 COPs, and we'll solve it. And you guys wouldn't have to think about it. You guys will go to some other issue. And now we are throwing it to the next generation. It's kind of like, I have kids and some others may, when you go on a long journey and at some point the kids at the back of the car start saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? I think the world has begun to ask, are we there yet? And I think we, and by we I mean not just the COP, all of us owe them an answer. I think they're smart enough to realize that if the answer is, we are still far away, but we are trying, as long as we give the honest sense that we are trying our best, and we are keeper of that high ambition, that we are not going to bring the ambition down each time, right? I think people will trust us and join us in action. Right? If I have a minute, can I say one thing about 1.5? Because I thought one of the most optimistic statements I've seen is the title you've given, and thank you for the optimism. By God, we need that optimism, right? The 1.5. We all read the same things. There is very little science that will say that there is any pathway possible to a 1.5 right now. Right? Now, I say that for a reason. I'm being very blunt. I'm being Adil Najam, not President of WWF for a moment, right? But there is no science I know that takes us to 1.5 given what we are doing right now. Does that mean we give up on 1.5? No, I think that's why that is a good title. 1.5 is becoming even more important because we are not going to achieve it. Because you will have to not only bend the curve this way, you will have to bend the curve this way. Right? And that is the level of action and ambition that we will have to talk for. So to me, that is what loss and damage is about. There is the negotiation text, which I expect in that first sense, to come to some agreement. The world doesn't know what that agreement is. The world doesn't understand half the language that comes out of it. The world will see the actions. There are people whose children will suffer that loss. There are places that will see that damage. If that real loss is addressed, if that real damage is minimized, then we can hold our head high. Otherwise, our kids will ask us, what were we doing in Dubai?
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, I can see Manuel wants to have a word, but we'll also put your hands up. So Manuel, while you're talking, I'll look around. If there's, Dana over here has a microphone. If there's any questions, please raise your hand.
Yep. Thank you. I love your phrase, Adil, that adaptation reflects the failure of mitigation. And loss and damage, the super failure. But let me add something, because I fully agree with you. Also, adaptation and loss and damage, it is reflecting the failure of the economic system. That is a key element, and that is why we have to talk about systemic change. And it's interesting. Unfortunately, the Pope is not coming, but I'm not sure how many of you have read his last letter, that it was released 3 weeks ago. It's interesting. He's saying, do we believe that the system, it will be changed by who is in charge of the system? It's true. That is the doubt that we are having. Because the point it is, there are a lot of resistance of the phasing out of fossil fuels because of the economy. But nobody cares about the economy of the poorest. Nobody's cares with loss and damage. If somebody lost his economic activity, houses, and all of that. So it is a bit unfair economic system. So we are interested on this side of the economy, but we don't care about the other side of the economy. So my point, and that is why I took the floor again, it is we have to bring this kind of economic reflection to the debate. It is key because also the debate is becoming a strongly an economic one. No? That is the new dynamic of the process. It is a strongly economic. So it is about the loss and damage funding mechanism, but that is just one piece. It is about a changing on the system. No? And we are forgetting something that we discussed when we were looking for the Paris Agreement. Don't leave anyone behind. And we are losing that principle. Let's recover that principle. That principle it is to develop a systemic change, but by promoting equity, by developing technology, by bringing innovation, by walking the transition with equity. And that is something that we are forgetting, and it is extremely key in this debate.
Can I have half a minute? Because this is totally so good, leaving no one behind. Let me throw some numbers at you. So again, I talk about the flood because the loss and damage conversation and the COPs were very much related last year, or at least propelled by that. So let us go back to the flood in Pakistan. The World Bank and others estimated that the loss and damage because of the flood was $42 billion. They're not very good at math, so let's assume it wasn't 42, let's assume it's 20. Right? Okay? Or choose your other number, whatever number it is. Now, there was a lot of sympathy and there were lots of pledges and stuff that added up to $8 billion that would come from international community to help the loss and damage that had happened to the poorest people in that country. Of that 800 billion, about 700 million have come in. That's all. Let's say it's not 700 million, let's say it's $1 billion. So we'll reduce on one side, we'll increase on the other side. Let's say the loss was only 20, and let's say $1 billion has come in. That leaves you with 19. So the loss and damage math question is, pop quiz, you will be graded on this. If the loss and damage was actually 19 billion, or even 9 billion, who eventually paid it? So someone has to pay it, right? Because the loss and damage was someone's house is no longer there, someone's cattle is no longer there, someone's crop has been lost. So somewhere, someone paid for it. Let's say the government of Pakistan actually put $1 billion. I know they didn't, but let's say. That still leaves you with some number between $8 billion and $40 billion. Who paid for it? I'll tell you who paid for it. The poorest, most vulnerable, least responsible people in the world pay for it because they always pay for it. Climate finance essentially happens by the poorest, most vulnerable, least responsible people. How do they pay for it? My house gets washed away. I don't wait for some loss and damage fund to be created. I take the cattle, that was my savings I was going to use for my daughter's wedding, and I sell it. I'll tell you this, again, Saad is there, he's been working on this. I take my daughter, who was going to school, take her out of school, and marry her off at age 15, because that's a way to give her security. This is real, guys. This is real. Now, you can create any fund, we can name it anything, we can talk about fancy sort of structures, but at the end of the day, there is someone actually paying for the loss and damage that is happening. And that's the question.
Thanks, Mary.
Can I add something? Yes. I think because you mentioned earlier, so we're in the beginning of COP, so maintaining that optimism and that dream that we want to, achieve our goals. And to your point, Manuel, as well about the economic debate. I think usually we see COPs happening in two worlds, you know. One is the real discussion, you know, the negotiators deciding what's going to happen. And then you have everyone else outside of the negotiations discussing about those issues, you know, announcing their announcements, their initiatives, etc. So, and I remember last year, Manuel, when I came to you, I think it was in the middle of COP27, when, you know, the negotiations were going a bit south. And, you know, you see on one hand the, you know, celebration of non-state actors on everyone else on their announcements. And then on the other side, in the negotiations, really things not going very well. You mentioned to me, don't be optimistic because that's where action happens. On that, outside of those negotiating rooms, those non-state actors, the economic sectors, the businesses actually want to change. And that's kind of, since then, I've took that as a lesson that perhaps that's where the economic case is, that actually the world needs change. And it's showing in the COPs as well. So I don't know, just to maintain that positivism as we're starting that COP, that was something that I wanted to share with all of you.
Thanks, Marina. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. So is anyone want to have a question or not? And if not, oh, please don't. Wait on, we've got a microphone here.
Thank you very much. I think these were very inspiring statements, and I personally enjoy and taking some good lessons and messages and coming to these who paid for loss and damages. And I'm coming out of here with maybe instead of saying loss and damages, I will say damages and losses. Maybe that's the sequencing is the best. You damage and you lose something. But what I wanted to see is a bit the trend in those COPs. And I will remember vividly that in Marrakech, we were talking about more on the COP of the people, with this idea of the green zone coming in addition to the blue zone and so on. So I would want to see, particularly from the president of COP20, and also Advil, how do you see this movement? Are we moving more towards a COP of the people, or just still the people in the negotiating rooms and so on? What's this balance?
It is difficult to answer with numbers, but now I am used to using this analogy. For me, the Paris Agreement, it was like a big bang. So it was the beginning of something that it creates an expanding universe. What it is good, no? So probably not everything it is in the Paris Agreement, but creates a dynamic with different fronts, and it is a dynamic in expansion that has at least 5 fronts. So to answer your question, the first front, the political, that is a universe that it is expanding too slowly. So after the Paris Agreement, politicians are still taking decisions, representing their own countries in this place called the COP, but not with the speed that we expect must be. And that is why the critics. And that is why, again, this letter of the Pope, and I am not a priest, but I really enjoyed that letter. He's saying we have to rethink the multilateralism, no, because we do need to speed up that process. So that in sense of the political side. But also the Paris Agreement starts, and probably not only the Paris Agreement, a social awareness. And I am saying not only the Paris Agreement because that social awareness, it has been expanded because of the climate events. So more people knows about climate change and the different climate events. It is more aware that we are in a changing world and that we have to take decisions soon, what it is good, because that is creating a new generation of more aware people that I am sure will take soon, in the soon future, good decisions. But also we have this economic dynamic, and that is growing probably faster than the others. And it is important, again, if we really want to change the system, let's work on changing the system altogether, not the current economic sectors that probably are trying or avoiding to speed up the process. And this is the economic and the financial. And probably what it is a bit missing, it is the moral side, and the ethical side. And that is what we have to bring more into the table, ethics. No, I heard you, Adil, and in some way you have referred to that moral side. No, it is, we shouldn't accept, no, that the payment of the climate event, of the damages because of climate event, it is because of the poor people, and because it is true. It is not about a fund. It is about people who is immediately losing something, no, with any alternative. No, we have to create a more fair system. So that is the part that needs to be recovered. We have heard the Secretary General trying to bring this. We have heard the Pope trying to bring this. No, but we do need to bring more, the ethical side, because politicians are forgetting that side. And this is a moral process, not only economic or political, it's a moral process. No? And that is probably the thing that still it is missing, that I hope that soon it could grow, no? Because that is for me so important.
Okay, thank you for that, Manuel. Okay, I think we'll wrap up there. This is our first event in the Panda Hub for COP28, so thanks all for coming. While we were on, I guess Sultan Al Jaber has now become COP28 president, so there's lots, this is a huge event and lots are happening. So, we've covered the global stock take, we've covered fossil fuel phase out, we've covered the nature, loss and damage, we've... Yeah, well, you can add one sentence, please. I've heard you say one before.
It will be one. I just wanted to highlight what Marina said. Hope. Hope is really important. When we were at Copenhagen, there were stickers on the train that said Copenhagen, Copenhagen. If that didn't happen there, but if anything can happen at Dubai, I hope it is about hope. Hope not that we'll solve the problem, but that we are really trying. Right? I think that's what the world wants to hear. If that happens, that's the expectation.
Very good. Yeah, and yes, we also learned about what expectations could be. It's what we want or what we hope to happen. So yes, hope I think is important. Okay, so the next 2 weeks we've got a number of events here on nature, on energy, on climate change, Africa, oceans, you name it. So do look up. If you Google WWF and COP28, you'll find our page with all the events. But thank you again for coming, and thanks to our panelists.